The coffee machine hissed for the 100th time that day, and Maya wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. The smell of grease and burnt toast filled the air at Pete's all-night diner. The same smell that had clung to her uniform for the past 6 years. She moved between tables like a dancer who had forgotten the music, her steps automatic and tired. "Order up," shouted Tony from the kitchen, his voice cutting through the dinner rush noise. Maya grabbed the plates, careful not to spill the gravy that always seemed to slosh around, no matter how steady she tried to be. Table 7 was waiting, an older man who came in every Tuesday, always ordered the meatloaf, and left exactly $2 as a tip. But as she set down his plate, the man looked up and smiled. "Thank you, dear. You know, you remind me of my daughter. She used to hum while she worked, just like you do." Maya paused. She hadn't realized she was humming. These days, music seemed to leak out of her without permission, like water from a cracked pipe. Even when she tried to push it down, melodies would surface while she poured coffee or cleaned tables. The dinner crowd was the worst. Families arguing over who would pay the check. Couples on awkward first dates ordering the cheapest items on the menu, and truckers stopping for their 3rd cup of coffee before hitting the road again. Maya served them all with a smile that felt more like a mask with each passing day. "Maya, you got table 12, called Lisa, the other waitress working tonight." Lisa had been here longer than anyone. 15 years of carrying plates and dealing with difficult customers. She had dreams. Once too wanted to be a teacher. Now she just talked about her son's baseball games and counted tips at the end of each shift. Table 12 was a young couple, probably college students. They shared a single burger and split the fries, counting quarters to make sure they had enough money. Maya remembered being their age, when a $5 meal felt like a luxury. Back then, she had plans. Big plans. She had graduated from community college with a music degree 3 years ago. The ceremony felt like a victory lap, her grandmother crying in the front row, proud that someone in their family had made it through college. Maya had worn her cap and gown like armor, ready to take on the world with her knowledge of music theory and performance techniques. But the world, it turned out, wasn't particularly interested in hiring piano players. The few music teaching jobs required experience she didn't have. Performance opportunities paid barely enough to cover gas money. So she kept her job at the diner, telling herself it was temporary, just until something better came along. 3 years later, she was still waiting. Her apartment was a 15-minute drive from the diner, in a building that had seen better decades. The paint peeled in the corners, and the elevator made sounds that suggested it might give up at any moment. But it was home, and more importantly, it was where her piano lived. The piano had been her grandmother's gift when Maya graduated high school. Not new, not fancy, but it worked. Every key made sound, even if some were a little flat. Her grandmother had saved for 2 years to buy it from a church that was upgrading their instruments. Music is like breathing. Her grandmother used to say you can hold your breath for a while, but eventually, you have to let it out. Maya thought about those words as she finished her shift, counting tips that barely covered her monthly expenses. Rent, car payment, groceries, and the small amount she tried to save each month. It all added up to exactly what she earned, with nothing left over for luxuries like new sheet music or piano lessons. The drive home took her past the community center where she used to volunteer, teaching basic piano to kids whose families couldn't afford private lessons. She had loved those Saturday mornings, watching little faces light up when they played their first complete song. But when the diner started scheduling her for weekend shifts, she had to give it up. The money was more important than the joy. Or at least, that's what she told herself. Back in her apartment, Maya kicked off her work shoes and looked at the piano sitting in the corner of her living room. It was covered with a thin layer of dust, and a stack of bills she hadn't opened yet. When was the last time she had played? Really played? Not just the occasional scale or half-remembered melody, While rushing to get ready for work, she sat on the bench and lifted the cover, revealing keys that looked like old teeth in the dim light. Her fingers found middle C automatically, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. The sound was softer than she remembered, or maybe she had just gotten used to the constant noise of the diner. Maya started with something simple, a piece she had learned in her first year of college. Her fingers moved slowly at first, relearning the patterns they once knew by heart. As she played, she could hear her grandmother's voice again, encouraging her to feel the music instead of just playing the notes. The melody filled her small apartment, pushing against the walls and flowing out through the thin windows. For the first time in months, Maya felt like herself again. Not the tired waitress who smiled on command, not the college graduate whose degree gathered dust in a frame, but the musician she had always been underneath everything else. She played until her neighbor upstairs started moving around, probably getting ready for an early shift somewhere. Maya closed the piano carefully and got ready for bed, but the music stayed with her. As she fell asleep, she could still hear the notes in her head, mixing with the memory of her grandmother's words about breathing and music and holding on too long. Tomorrow would bring another shift at the diner, more coffee stains and demanding customers, and the constant smell of fried food. But tonight, for just a few minutes, Maya had remembered who she used to be, and maybe, if she was lucky, who she could still become. The alarm clock on her nightstand showed 1:30 a.m. In 6 hours. She would be back at Pete's, pouring coffee and taking orders and pretending that this was enough. But something had shifted during those few minutes at the piano. A small crack in the wall she had built around her dreams. Music, her grandmother had said, was like breathing, and Maya had been holding her breath for far too long. Maya stared at the ceiling of her bedroom, watching shadows from passing cars dance across the cracked plaster. The digital clock beside her bed glowed to 17 a.m. in angry red numbers. She had been lying there for an hour, her mind racing despite her exhausted body. It had been another brutal shift at Pete's. A birthday party of 8 college kids had kept her running for 2 hours, ordering complicated drinks and leaving a mess that took 30 minutes to clean up. Their tip barely covered the cost of the extra napkins they used. Then there was the businessman who sent his burger back 3 times, each time finding a new complaint, before finally storming out without paying. Maya's feet ached, her back was sore from bending over tables all day, and she could still smell the mixture of grease and cleaning supplies that seemed permanently attached to her clothes. But her mind wouldn't quiet down. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the businessman's angry voice, or remembered the look of disappointment on an elderly woman's face when Maya told her they were out of apple pie. She turned over, trying to find a comfortable position on her lumpy mattress. Through the thin walls of her apartment building, she could hear Mrs. Chen next door. The older woman had been having trouble sleeping since her husband passed away 6 months ago. Maya often heard her moving around at night, making tea or watching old movies with the volume turned low. The piano sat in the living room just beyond Maya's bedroom door. She could see its outline in the darkness, like a faithful friend waiting patiently. The memory of playing a few nights ago came back to her, how natural it had felt, how the stress had melted away with each note. Maya slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to the living room. The hardwood floor was cold against her feet, and she shivered in her old college t-shirt and pajama pants. She didn't turn on the lights, letting her hands find the piano. Bench by memory, the keys felt cool under her fingertips as she lifted the cover as quietly as possible. She didn't want to wake her neighbors, especially Mrs. Chen, who needed all the sleep she could get. Maya pressed middle C gently, testing how soft she could play while still hearing the note clearly. She started with a simple melody, something her grandmother had taught her years ago. It was a lullaby from Mexico, passed down through generations of women in her family. As she played, Maya could almost hear her grandmother's voice humming along, the way she used to when Maya was little and couldn't sleep. The music seemed to fill the empty spaces in her apartment, making the small rooms feel larger and warmer. Maya's fingers moved from the lullaby to a piece she had learned in college, then to something else entirely, a melody that seemed to come from nowhere, flowing out of her hands without conscious thought. She wasn't reading sheet music or following any particular pattern. Instead, she let her emotions guide her fingers, playing out the frustration of her day, the exhaustion in her bones, and the small spark of hope that kept her going. The music became a conversation between her heart and the keys. Speaking a language that didn't need words, minutes turned into an hour without Maya realizing it. She played softly, carefully, but with growing confidence. The melodies that emerged were different from anything she had learned in school. They were messier, more honest, mixing classical techniques with the jazz standards that played endlessly on Pete's old radio system. Sometimes she found herself playing the rhythm of the coffee machine at work, turning its mechanical hiss into something musical. Other times, she echoed the sad songs that truckers played on the jukebox during their lonely late-night stops. Without meaning to, Maya was creating something entirely her own. As she played, she noticed that the apartment building seemed to settle into a deeper quiet. Even the usual sounds from the street below faded away, as if the world was listening. Maya felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months, maybe years. This was what she had been missing, what she had been too tired and stressed to remember she needed. The next night, Maya found herself unable to sleep again. But this time, instead of lying in bed fighting her thoughts, she went straight to the piano. She played for 2 hours, losing herself in melodies that seemed to pour out of her like water from a broken dam. The third night, she didn't even try to sleep first. After her shift at Pete's, she came home, changed out of her uniform, and sat down at the piano bench. It was becoming a ritual, a way to wash off the day and remember who she was underneath the exhaustion and money worries. Maya started experimenting, blending different styles and techniques. She took the sad country songs from the diner's jukebox and played them like classical pieces. She turned children's lullabies into complex jazz arrangements. Everything she had ever heard seemed to mix together in her playing, creating something that was uniquely hers. One night, as she played a particularly emotional piece about missing her grandmother, Maya heard a soft sound from the wall that separated her apartment from Mrs. Chen's. It wasn't a complaint or a request to be quiet. It sounded almost like someone humming along. The realization that someone might be listening made Maya nervous at first. She had always thought of these midnight sessions as private, a conversation between herself and the piano. But as she continued playing, she found herself thinking about Mrs. Chen sitting alone in her apartment, missing her husband and struggling with her own sleepless nights. Maya began to play with Mrs. Chen in mind, choosing gentler melodies that might bring comfort instead of adding to the sadness. She played the songs her grandmother used to hum while cooking, peaceful tunes that spoke of home and family and love that lasts beyond goodbye. As the weeks passed, Maya's midnight piano sessions became the best part of her day. No matter how difficult her shift at Pete's had been, no matter how rude the customers or how small the tips, she knew that she had this waiting for her. The piano didn't judge her for being tired or broke or uncertain about her future. It simply accepted whatever she brought to it and helped her transform it into something beautiful. Her playing grew stronger and more confident with each passing night. The tentative touch of those first sessions gave way to bold, expressive performances that filled her small apartment with life. Maya was rediscovering not just her love of music, but her ability to create it, to channel her experiences into melodies that told her story without words. She started keeping a small notebook by the piano, jotting down musical ideas that came to her during the day. A customer's laugh might inspire a light, dancing melody. The rhythm of rain on the diner's windows could become a gentle ballad. Maya was learning to see music everywhere, and her midnight sessions were where she brought these discoveries to life. For the first time since graduation, Maya felt like a musician again. Not someone who used to play piano, but someone who was actively creating music every day. The tired waitress and the passionate pianist were the same person, and finally, they were learning to coexist. Maya's roommate Lily had always been the tech-savvy one, while Maya struggled to figure out basic phone settings. Lily seemed to understand every app, every filter, and every trend that swept through social media. She worked remotely as a graphic designer, which meant she spent most of her day online, watching what people shared and what caught their attention. For weeks, Lily had been listening to Maya's midnight piano sessions from her bedroom down the hall. At first, she thought Maya was playing along to recordings. The music was too beautiful, too polished, to be coming from someone who worked double shifts at a diner. But one night, curiosity got the better of her, and she tiptoed to Maya's door to listen more closely. What she heard took her breath away. Maya wasn't playing from sheet music or copying songs from the radio. She was creating something completely original, mixing classical training with jazz influences and adding her own emotional touches that made even simple melodies sound profound. The music told stories without words, painting pictures of long workdays, quiet hopes, and dreams that refused to die. Lily had tried several times to convince Maya to record her playing. "People need to hear this," she would say over coffee in their tiny kitchen. But Maya always brushed off the suggestion. She was tired, she had to work, and besides, who would want to listen to someone playing an old piano in a rundown apartment? "You don't understand," Maya would say, pouring herself another cup of coffee before heading to Pete's. "This isn't performance music. It's just something I do to relax. It's personal." But Lily couldn't stop thinking about it. She had friends who posted their art online and built careers from their creativity. She knew how social media worked, how the right piece of content could find its audience and spread like wildfire. Maya's music deserved to be heard by more than just the thin walls of their apartment building. One Tuesday night, Maya came home from an especially difficult shift. A large family had kept her running for 3 hours, ordering complicated modifications to every dish and complaining about wait times that were completely normal for a busy dinner rush. They had left a $5 tip on a $100 bill, and Maya had spent the drive home fighting back tears of frustration. She went straight to the piano, not even bothering to change out of her uniform first. The music that poured out of her that night was raw and honest, filled with the exhaustion and disappointment she couldn't express any other way. She played for nearly 2 hours, working through melodies that captured the weight of carrying heavy trays, the fake smile she wore for difficult customers, and the small moments of beauty she found even in her hardest days. Lily listened from her room, her heart breaking for her friend and roommate. Maya's talent was extraordinary, but more than that, her music had the power to make people feel less alone. In a world where everyone seemed disconnected despite being constantly online, Maya was creating something that could bring genuine human connection. Without telling Maya, Lily quietly recorded 3 minutes of the session on her phone. She waited until Maya had gone to bed, then listened to the recording several times, amazed at how clear and beautiful it sounded even through her phone's simple microphone. The old piano's slightly out-of-tune keys somehow added character rather than taking away from the performance. The next morning, while Maya was at work, Lily made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She created a simple social media account with no identifying information, just a generic username and no profile picture. She uploaded the 3-minute recording with a caption that read, "Found this in my late night scrolling. Someone playing piano at 2 a.m. in their apartment. Don't know who this is, but it made me cry in the best way. Sometimes you find magic in the most unexpected places." Lily posted it and went about her day, working on client projects, and occasionally checking to see if anyone had noticed the video. By noon, it had a few dozen views and a handful of comments. By evening, those numbers had grown to several hundred. But Maya was working a double shift and wouldn't be home until after midnight, so she had no idea what was happening. The next morning, Lily woke up to her phone buzzing constantly. The video had exploded overnight, reaching thousands of views and generating hundreds of comments. People were sharing it, tagging their friends, and asking who the mysterious pianist was. The comments were overwhelmingly positive, with people describing how the music had moved them, helped them through difficult moments, or simply made their day brighter. When Maya stumbled into the kitchen for her morning coffee, Lily was sitting at her laptop with a strange expression on her face. "Maya," she said carefully, "I need to tell you something, and you might be upset with me at first." Maya paused with her coffee mug halfway to her lips. "What did you do?" Lily turned her laptop screen around to show the video and its growing statistics. "I recorded you playing last night and posted it online. I know I should have asked first, but I knew you'd say no, and people needed to hear this." Maya's first reaction was panic. She set down her coffee mug with shaking hands and stared at the screen. "You posted what? How many people have seen this?" "Oh my God, Lily, what if someone from work sees it? What if my boss finds out I'm staying up late playing piano when I should be resting for my shifts?" But as Maya read through the comments, her panic slowly transformed into something else. Complete strangers were writing paragraphs about how her music had affected them. A nurse working night shifts said it reminded her why she loved helping people. A college student studying for exams said it helped him focus. An elderly man wrote that it reminded him of his late wife, who used to play piano and brought him comfort during a difficult time. "This can't be real," Maya whispered, scrolling through comment after comment of genuine appreciation and emotional response. "It's real," Lily said softly. "This is what I've been trying to tell you. Your music doesn't just sound beautiful, it makes people feel something. In a world where everyone's always rushing around and stressed out, you're creating moments of peace and connection." As the day progressed, the video continued to grow. Maya called in sick to work, something she never did, and spent the day watching in amazement as her late-night piano session reached people around the world. The view count climbed into the tens of thousands, then higher. Music bloggers began sharing it. Other musicians left comments, expressing their admiration for Maya's unique style and emotional depth. People started asking for more recordings, begging to know who the mysterious late-night pianist was and where they could hear more of her music. By the end of the week, the video had reached over 1 million views. Maya's phone, which usually only buzzed with work schedule, notifications, and bills, was now constantly alive with messages from strangers who had been touched by her music. Record labels were trying to track down the anonymous poster. Music magazines were writing articles about the viral piano performance that had captured the internet's attention. Maya sat at her piano that night, looking at the keys that had always been her private escape, and realized that everything was about to change. The small apartment sessions that had been her secret refuge were no longer secret. The world was listening now, and for the first time in years, Maya wasn't sure if that terrified her or thrilled her. Maya stared at her phone screen during her 10-minute break, trying to process the message she had just received. It was from someone claiming to be a talent agent from Nashville, asking if she was interested in discussing opportunities. The message looked professional, with proper spelling and a company's signature. But Maya had learned to be suspicious of too good to be true offers. "Order up, Maya." Tony's voice cut through her thoughts from the kitchen. She quickly shoved her phone back into her apron pocket and grabbed the plates waiting under the heat lamps. Table 6 was getting impatient, and she could see the husband checking his watch while his wife tapped her fingers on the table. The lunch rush at Pete's had become even more stressful since her video went viral 2 weeks ago. Maya found herself constantly distracted, thinking about the thousands of comments she hadn't responded to and the dozens of messages from people claiming to be music industry professionals. Every ping from her phone made her jump, wondering if it might be the opportunity that could change her life or just another spam message. "You seem different lately," said Roberto, the cook who worked the afternoon shift. He had been at Pete's longer than anyone and had a way of noticing things others missed. "Everything okay?" Maya forced a smile as she filled coffee cups for table 3. "Just tired. You know how it is." But it was more than tired. Maya felt like she was living two completely different lives that were pulling her in opposite directions. During the day, she was still the same waitress she'd always been, taking orders and dealing with difficult customers and counting tips. But at night, she was someone else entirely, a musician whose work was being shared and discussed by people around the world. The contrast was becoming harder to manage. Yesterday, a music blogger had written a detailed analysis of her playing style, praising her innovative approach to contemporary classical fusion. An hour later, Maya was cleaning up spilled ketchup while a customer complained that his burger was too cold. Her phone buzzed again. Maya glanced around to make sure her manager wasn't watching, then quickly checked the notification. It was another collaboration request, this time from a violinist in Germany who wanted to create a duet based on her viral piece. The message was in broken English, but the enthusiasm came through clearly. "Maya, table 9 needs more napkins," called Lisa from across the diner. Maya tucked her phone away and grabbed a stack of napkins, her mind still on the message from Germany. How was she supposed to collaborate with musicians in other countries when she could barely find time to practice at home? Her midnight sessions had become irregular because she was staying up too late, reading comments and messages, leaving her exhausted for her morning shifts. The dinner rush was particularly brutal that night. A large group of teenagers had taken over 3 tables, ordering complicated drinks and leaving a mess that would take an hour to clean up properly. Maya's feet ached, her back was sore, and she could feel a headache building behind her eyes. As she wiped down tables for the 3rd time, Maya's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and saw an unknown number with a Los Angeles area code. Her heart jumped, but she had to let it go to voicemail. Pete's had a strict no-phone policy during shifts, and her manager was already giving her suspicious looks. During her break, Maya listened to the voicemail in the parking lot behind the diner. It was from someone at a record label, professional and polite, asking if she would be interested in a phone conversation about potential opportunities. They had tracked down her real name through social media detective work and wanted to discuss next steps. Maya's hands shook as she saved the message. This was exactly what she had dreamed about during all those years of serving coffee and cleaning tables. But as she looked back at the diner's neon sign flickering in the evening light, reality crashed over her like cold water. She couldn't just walk away from Pete's. The job paid her rent, bought her groceries, and kept her car running. Her bank account had exactly $437 in it, not enough to survive more than a week without steady income. The record label person wanted to talk, but talking didn't pay bills. Maya went back inside and finished her shift, but she was making mistakes. She forgot to bring extra sauce to table 7, mixed up orders for tables 4 and 5, and dropped a full coffee pot in the kitchen, sending ceramic shards across the floor. Each mistake made her more nervous, and being nervous led to more mistakes. "What's going on with you tonight?" asked her manager, Dave, as Maya swept up the broken coffee pot. "You've been distracted for weeks. If you need time off, just say so. But I can't have you making mistakes like this during the dinner rush." Maya wanted to tell him everything. About the viral video, about the messages from record labels, about the impossible choice between financial security and following her dreams. But Dave was a practical man who dealt with practical problems. He wouldn't understand why she was torn between serving coffee and making music. "I'm sorry," Maya said instead. "I haven't been sleeping well. I'll do better. Dave studied her face for a moment, then shrugged. Just get your head right, okay? We're already short-staffed as it is. The next few days followed the same pattern. Maya would receive messages from musicians, bloggers, and industry professionals during the day. Then spend her shifts at Pete's trying to focus on tables and orders while her mind raced with possibilities. She was making more mistakes, moving slower, and struggling to maintain the cheerful demeanor that kept her tips decent. Her midnight piano sessions became her only escape, but even those were complicated now. Maya found herself playing for an invisible audience instead of just for herself. She worried about whether her new pieces were good enough to follow up the viral video, whether people would be disappointed, whether she was worthy of all the attention. One night, as she played a particularly emotional piece about feeling trapped between two worlds, Maya heard the familiar sound of Mrs. Chen moving around next door. On impulse, Maya got up from the piano and knocked softly on her neighbor's door. Mrs. Chen opened it wearing a faded pink bathrobe, her gray hair pinned back with bobby pins. "Maya, dear, is everything all right? I'm sorry to bother you so late," Maya said. "I know you've been listening to me play, and I wanted to make sure I wasn't keeping you awake." Mrs. Chen smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Oh, sweetheart, your music is the only thing that helps me sleep these days. Since my husband passed, the nights are so quiet and long. Your piano makes the apartment feel less empty." They stood in the hallway for a moment, two people dealing with their own struggles in the middle of the night. Finally, Mrs. Chen spoke again. "You know, I used to be a teacher before I retired. I've watched a lot of young people over the years, and I can tell when someone is at a crossroads. Whatever decision you're facing, don't let fear make it for you." Maya nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." Back in her apartment, Maya sat at the piano but didn't play. She thought about Mrs. Chen's words, about the messages piling up on her phone, about the look of disappointment on Dave's face when she made mistakes at work. She was at a crossroads, and the path forward wasn't clear. But one thing was certain, she couldn't keep living in two worlds much longer. Something had to give, and Maya was terrified that no matter what choice she made, she would lose something important in the process. Maya's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 6 years. But this Tuesday felt different. As she lay in bed, listening to the familiar sound, she realized she had made a decision sometime during the night, probably while dreaming about piano keys and coffee pots, dancing together in some strange ballet. The record label had called 3 more times yesterday. The producer, a woman named Jessica, had been patient but direct. "We need to know by Friday," she had said during their last conversation. "This kind of opportunity doesn't wait around forever. The internet moves fast, and we want to work with you while people still remember your video." Maya had written down every word of that conversation, trying to make sense of what Jessica was offering. Studio time, professional musicians to collaborate with, and enough money up front to cover her living expenses for 6 months while they worked on an album. It sounded like a fairy tale. Except fairy tales didn't usually require you to quit your job and risk everything on a maybe. She got dressed in her Pete's uniform for what she hoped would be one of the last times. The polyester shirt felt heavier than usual, and the name tag that read, "Maya, happy to help," seemed to mock her as she pinned it to her chest. In the mirror, she looked like the same tired waitress she'd been yesterday. But inside, everything had changed. The drive to Pete's took her past the community center, where she used to teach piano lessons to kids. A new sign in the window advertised music classes starting next month. Maya wondered if the children she had taught still played, or if life had gotten in the way of their dreams too. She thought about 8-year-old Carlos, who could barely reach the pedals but played with such joy that it made everyone in the room smile. What would she tell him about following dreams versus paying bills? Pete's was already busy when Maya arrived. The breakfast crowd was a mix of construction workers grabbing coffee before job sites opened, and early commuters who preferred diner food to whatever they could grab at gas stations. Maya tied her apron around her waist and picked up her order. Pad, muscle memory taking over. "Morning, Maya," called out Frank, a regular who came in every Tuesday and Thursday for scrambled eggs and wheat toast. "You look different today. New haircut?" Maya smiled and poured his coffee. "Same old me, Frank. How's the wife doing?" Frank launched into his usual update about his retirement plans and his wife's garden, but Maya found herself only half listening. Her mind kept drifting to the conversation she needed to have with Dave, her manager. How do you tell someone you're quitting a steady job to chase a dream that might disappear as quickly as it appeared? The morning rush passed in a blur of coffee, refills, and breakfast orders. Maya's hands moved automatically, clearing tables and taking orders, but her heart wasn't in it. Every time her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, she wondered if it was another opportunity or another reason to be scared. During her break, Maya sat in her car and called her grandmother's sister, Aunt Rosa, who had helped raise her after her parents died. Rosa was the practical one in the family, the voice of reason, who had encouraged Maya to get her server's license as a backup plan. "Mia," Rosa said, after Maya explained the situation, "you know I love you like my own daughter, but this sounds too good to be true. What happens if this record company changes their mind? What happens if people stop caring about your music? You have a good job that pays your bills." Maya had expected this response, but it still hurt to hear. "But what if it works out, Tia? What if this is my chance to do what I've always wanted to do? And what if it's not?" Rosa replied gently. "You're not a teenager anymore, Maya. Have responsibilities. Dreams are beautiful, but they don't pay rent." After hanging up, Maya sat in the parking lot feeling more confused than ever. Rosa's words made sense. She was 28 years old, with $400 in savings, and a job that barely covered her expenses. Quitting to pursue music was exactly the kind of impractical decision that Rosa had spent years teaching her to avoid. But then Maya remembered Mrs. Chen's words about not letting fear make decisions for her. She thought about the hundreds of messages from people who said her music had helped them through difficult times. She thought about the producer who believed her talent was worth investing in, even though they had never met in person. The lunch rush was starting when Maya went. Back inside, Dave was behind the counter, checking inventory and looking stressed about something. Maya knew he was dealing with his own problems. His mother was sick, his teenage son was having trouble in school, and the diner's profits had been declining for months. "Dave," Maya said during a brief lull between customers, "can I talk to you for a minute?" He looked up from his clipboard with tired eyes. "Make it quick. We're already behind on prep for the dinner rush." Maya took a deep breath. "I need to give you my 2 weeks' notice." Dave stared at her for a moment, then set down his clipboard. "Is this about the mistakes you've been making? Because we can work on that. Everyone goes through rough patches." "It's not about the mistakes," Maya said, though she knew they were part of it. "I've gotten an opportunity to pursue music professionally, and I need to take it." Dave's expression shifted from surprise to disappointment to something that might have been anger. "Music? Maya, you're one of my best servers. You know this place. You know the customers. And you actually show up on time. Do you know how hard it is to find reliable people?" Maya felt a stab of guilt. Dave was right. She was reliable, and Pete's needed reliable people. "I know, and I'm sorry, but this might be my only chance." "Your only chance at what?" Dave asked, his voice rising slightly. "To be broke and unemployed in 6 months when this music thing doesn't work out. You think you're the first person to quit a good job chasing some pipe dream." Other employees were starting to notice their conversation. Lisa looked over from the coffee station with concern. and Tony peeked out from the kitchen. Maya felt her face getting hot, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Maybe you're right," Maya said quietly. "Maybe it won't work out, but I have to try, or I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what could have happened." Dave shook his head and picked up his clipboard. 2 weeks, then. But don't come back here when reality hits and you need your job back. I can't afford to keep training people who don't want to be here. Maya spent the rest of her shift feeling like she was walking through a fog. Some customers noticed she seemed different and asked if she was feeling okay. Her regular customers, the ones who knew her name and asked about her life, seemed to sense that something had changed. Frank left an extra-large tip with a note that said good luck with whatever comes next. By closing time, word had spread through the diner that Maya was leaving. Lisa gave her a hug and said she would miss their conversations during slow periods. Tony, who rarely talked to anyone except to call out orders, shook her hand and said he hoped her music made her happy. As Maya drove home that night, she felt a mixture of terror and excitement that made her stomach flutter. She had just quit the only steady job she'd had since college. Her savings account wouldn't last more than a few weeks. She had no guarantee that the record label opportunity would work out, or that her viral fame would translate into a sustainable career. But for the first time in years, Maya felt like she was moving toward something instead of just surviving day by day. Tomorrow, she would call Jessica and accept the offer. She would start the process of turning her midnight piano sessions into something bigger, something that could reach people around the world instead of just through thin apartment walls. Maya pulled into her parking space and looked up at her apartment building. Mrs. Chen's light was on, and Maya could hear the faint sound of a late-night movie through the walls. Tonight, she would play piano, not as a tired waitress trying to forget her problems, but as a musician preparing for the next chapter of her life. Maya stood outside Harmony Studios at 8:55 a.m., 5 minutes early for her first recording session. The building looked nothing like what she had expected. Instead of the glamorous glass and steel structure she had imagined, it was a converted warehouse in an industrial part of town, with a simple sign that she almost missed while driving around the block 3 times. Looking for parking, her hands were shaking as she pressed the buzzer next to a heavy metal door. She had barely slept the night before, tossing and turning as her mind raced through everything that could go wrong. What if her music didn't sound good on professional equipment? What if the other musicians were too advanced for her? What if Jessica, the producer, realized she had made a mistake and sent Maya home? "You must be Maya," said a woman with short, gray hair and kind eyes who opened the door. "I'm Jessica. We talked on the phone." Maya followed Jessica through a narrow hallway lined with gold and platinum records from artists she recognized. The walls seemed to whisper stories of success and failure, of dreams that came true and others that didn't. Maya wondered which category her story would fall into. The recording studio was both smaller and more impressive than Maya had imagined. The control room was packed with equipment that looked like it belonged on a spaceship, with hundreds of buttons, knobs, and digital displays that meant nothing to her. Through a thick glass window, she could see the recording room with its professional piano, microphones positioned at precise angles, and acoustic panels covering every surface. "That's a Steinway Model D," Jessica said, noticing Maya staring at the piano. "Same model used by most concert pianists. It's been tuned twice this week." Maya nodded, trying to look like she knew what that meant. The truth was, she had only played on her grandmother's old upright piano and the beat-up keyboard at her community college. The idea of playing on an instrument worth more than her car was terrifying. "Let's start with something simple," Jessica said, leading Maya into the recording room. "Just play the piece from your viral video. We'll record it clean and see how it sounds in here." Maya sat at the piano bench and lifted her hands to the keys. The moment she touched them, she knew something was wrong. The keys felt different, more responsive, more sensitive than what she was used to. When she pressed what should have been a gentle note, it came out louder than expected. When she tried to adjust, the next note was too soft. "Take your time." Jessica's voice came through the studio monitors. "The piano has a different touch than what you're probably used to. Professional instruments are more sensitive." Maya tried again, but her playing sounded stilted and nervous. The melody that had flowed so naturally in her apartment now felt forced and artificial. She could hear every small mistake amplified through the studio speakers, every slight hesitation and uncertainty. "I'm sorry," Maya said, stopping mid. "I don't know what's wrong. It doesn't sound right." Jessica came into the recording room and sat on a chair next to the piano. "You're overthinking it. I've seen this happen to lots of musicians the first time they're in a professional studio. Everything feels different, more intense. The equipment picks up every detail, and that can be intimidating." They spent the next hour with Maya, trying to play pieces she knew by heart, but nothing sounded the way it did at home. The studio's perfect acoustics and high-end equipment seemed to highlight every flaw in her technique. Maya began to doubt whether she belonged here at all. "Let's take a break," Jessica suggested. "Why don't we talk about what you want to accomplish with this album?" Over coffee in the studio's small kitchen, Maya found herself opening up about her musical journey. She talked about learning to play on her grandmother's piano, about the midnight sessions that helped her cope with stress, and about the way music had always been her emotional outlet rather than a performance. "That's your problem right there," Jessica said gently. "You're trying to perform instead of just playing. The magic in your viral video wasn't technical perfection. It was honesty. People connected with the emotion, not the accuracy." When they returned to the recording room, Jessica made a suggestion that surprised Maya. "Close your eyes. Pretend you're back in your apartment at 2 a.m. Forget about the microphones. Forget about the recording. Forget about me listening. Just play for yourself." Maya closed her eyes and tried to transport herself back to her living room. She thought about Mrs. Chen in the next apartment, about coming home exhausted from Pete's, about the way music had been her refuge during the hardest times. Slowly, her fingers found their natural rhythm on the keys. The Steinway responded to her touch like it was reading her mind. Notes that had sounded harsh and disconnected before now flowed together in smooth, expressive phrases. Maya forgot about the recording equipment and lost herself in the music, the way she had done hundreds of times before. When she finished the piece, Maya opened her eyes to find Jessica smiling in the control room. "That's it," Jessica's voice came through the speakers. "That's the sound we're looking for." But success brought new challenges. Jessica wanted to build on Maya's natural style while making it more commercially viable. She brought in other musicians, a subtle string section, a bass player who could add depth without overwhelming the piano, a drummer who specialized in acoustic, understated rhythms. Maya had never collaborated with other musicians professionally before. She was used to being the only voice in her musical conversations, able to change tempo or mood on impulse. Now she had to communicate her ideas to people who spoke the language of music theory and professional terminology that she had learned in community college, but rarely used. "Can we make the bridge more hopeful?" she would ask, and the violinist would respond with technical questions about chord progressions and key changes that made Maya feel like she was speaking a foreign language. The other musicians were patient and encouraging, but Maya could sense their professionalism and experience in every conversation. They had worked with established artists, recorded albums that actually sold copies, and performed in venues that Maya had only dreamed of seeing. From the audience, days turned into weeks as they worked on arrangements and recordings. Maya was learning to translate her emotional instincts into musical directions that the other musicians could follow. She was also learning that creating music for an album was different from playing for personal expression. "We need this song to work on radio," Jessica would say. or this section needs to be more accessible to listeners who aren't familiar with classical music. Maya found herself caught between staying true to her artistic vision and making the commercial compromises necessary for success. The breakthrough came during a particularly frustrating session. Maya had been trying for hours to record a new song that Jessica thought could be a single, but nothing sounded right. The other musicians had gone home, and Maya was alone in the studio with Jessica, both of them tired and running out of ideas. "Tell me about your grandmother," Jessica said suddenly. Maya was surprised by the question. "What does that have to do with the song? You've mentioned her several times, and every time you do, your voice changes. There's something there that matters to you." Maya found herself talking about her grandmother's lullabies, about the way music had been passed down through generations of women in her family, about the responsibility she felt to honor that legacy while creating something new. As she talked, her hands moved to the piano keys, almost unconsciously. The melody that emerged was unlike anything they had recorded before. It was deeply personal, yet universally relatable, combining the classical structure Jessica wanted with the emotional authenticity that had made Maya's original video go viral. The song seemed to play itself, flowing from Maya's memories and emotions directly through her fingers. When she finished, the studio was completely quiet. Jessica sat motionless in the control room, and Maya wondered if she had made a mistake by sharing something so personal. Then, Jessica's voice came through the speakers, soft but certain. "That's your album right there. Everything else we've recorded has been building up to that moment." Maya's first single, Midnight Memories, climbed the streaming charts faster than anyone had expected. Within 3 weeks of release, it had reached the top 20 on several platforms, and radio stations across the country were adding it to their playlists. Maya watched the numbers climb from her new apartment, a modest one-bedroom that was still an upgrade from the place she had shared with Lily. The success felt surreal. Just 6 months ago, she had been wiping down tables at Pete's Diner, worrying about making rent. Now she was getting calls from booking agents, wanting to schedule concerts in cities she had only seen in movies. The phone calls came at all hours, from the East Coast, the West Coast, and sometimes from other countries, where her music was finding audiences she never knew existed. Her first major performance was at the Blue Moon Theater, a venue she had driven past hundreds of times while working at the diner. Maya remembered looking at the marquee signs, announcing famous musicians, and wondering what it would feel like to see her own name up there. Now she knew it was terrifying and thrilling, in equal measure. Standing backstage on opening night, Maya could hear the audience filling the seats through the thin walls. Jessica stood beside her, adjusting Maya's stage outfit and offering last-minute encouragement. "Remember," Jessica said, "they're here because they already love your music. You're not trying to convince them of anything. Just share what you've already shared." But performing live was completely different from recording in a studio. The stage lights were brighter than Maya had expected, making it impossible to see individual faces in the audience. The piano, while beautiful, was in a different position than she was used to, and the acoustics of the theater changed how her music sounded. Every note seemed to echo longer than expected. Maya's hands trembled as she sat at the piano bench and adjusted the microphone. The audience fell silent, and for a moment, Maya panicked. What if she forgot the words? What if her fingers slipped on the keys? What if everyone realized she didn't belong on this stage? Then she heard a cough from somewhere in the audience, a small human sound that reminded her that the people watching were just people. They had bought tickets and driven to the theater and found parking and sat down because they wanted to hear music. Her music. Maya began with the piece that had started everything, her Midnight Melody. As the first notes filled the theater, she felt the audience lean forward, their attention focused completely on her. The nervousness began to fade, replaced by the familiar feeling of losing herself in the music. By the third song, Maya was no longer thinking about the lights, or the audience, or the possibility of making mistakes. She was simply playing, the way she had learned to do in her apartment at 2 a.m. The theater felt like an extension of her living room, and the audience felt like friends listening to her. Late-night sessions, the standing ovation at the end lasted for 3 minutes. Maya had never experienced anything like it. Hundreds of people on their feet, clapping and cheering for music she had created. As she took her bow, Maya spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Mrs. Chen was in the 3rd row, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Lisa from the diner was there with her husband, grinning and clapping enthusiastically. But the most surprising sight was near the back of the theater. Dave, her former manager from Pete's, stood with his arms crossed, not clapping but not leaving either. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod, the closest thing to approval she had ever gotten from him after the show. Maya was flooded with congratulations from people she had never met. Music industry professionals handed her business cards and spoke about opportunities she couldn't have imagined a year ago. Everyone wanted to talk to her, to be photographed with her, to be part of whatever was happening next. The attention was overwhelming. Maya found herself missing the simplicity of her old life, when the only person she had to please was herself and maybe Mrs. Chen listening through the thin walls. Now there were expectations, obligations, and a calendar full of commitments that seemed to multiply every day. Success brought changes Maya hadn't anticipated. She could afford nice clothes now, but she missed the comfort of her old uniform. She had a manager, an agent, and a publicist, but sometimes she felt more alone than when she was serving coffee to strangers. The music industry was full of people who wanted to help her succeed, but their version of success didn't always match what Maya had imagined. Her second major performance was at Carnegie Hall in New York City, opening for an established classical musician. The venue was legendary, the kind of place where careers were made and musical history was written. Maya's grandmother would have been amazed to know that her granddaughter would someday play on the same stage as the world's greatest musicians. The backstage area at Carnegie Hall was unlike anything Maya had experienced. Famous musicians walked past casually, warming up or discussing technical details with their teams. Maya felt like an imposter in her dressing room, surrounded by flowers from record label executives and congratulatory notes from people she had never met. As she prepared for the performance, Maya realized she was no longer nervous about playing piano. The technical aspects had become second nature after months of professional performances. Instead, she was nervous about living up to the image that had been created around her music. Magazine articles called her the voice of a generation and a classical music revolutionary, titles that felt far too big for someone who had learned to play on her grandmother's old upright piano. The performance at Carnegie Hall was flawless. From a technical standpoint, every note was perfect, every transition smooth, every emotional moment precisely timed. The audience was appreciative, the reviews were glowing, and the recording would be released as a live album. But as Maya took her bow on the Carnegie Hall stage, she felt a strange emptiness. The performance had been professional, polished, and commercially successful. It was everything her team had hoped for, yet something was missing, the spontaneous emotion that had made her midnight sessions so powerful after the show. Maya walked alone through the streets of New York City, still wearing her concert dress. The city was alive with late-night energy, people heading home from restaurants and theaters, couples walking hand in hand, workers finishing late shifts. Maya watched them all and realized she missed being part of that ordinary world. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from industry professionals, booking requests for even bigger venues, and interview requests from magazines and television shows. Maya's music was reaching millions of people, but she felt further away from her audience than ever before. Standing on a corner in Manhattan, watching regular people live their regular lives, Maya made a decision. Her next album would be different. It would return to the honesty and simplicity that had made her viral videos so powerful. She would find a way to stay connected to the emotions that had driven her to music in the first place. The success was real, the opportunities were amazing, and Maya was grateful for every minute of it. But she was also learning that fame and fulfillment weren't the same thing. The girl who had played piano at midnight to cope with exhaustion and stress was still inside her somewhere, and Maya was determined not to lose her in the pursuit of bigger stages and brighter lights as she hailed a taxi to take her back to her hotel. Maya thought about Mrs. Chen, probably sitting in her apartment listening to the late-night sounds of the city. Tomorrow, Maya would call her and thank her for the gentle encouragement that had helped make all of this possible. Success meant nothing if you forgot the people who believed in you before anyone else knew your name. 2 years after leaving Pete's Diner, Maya found herself standing in the parking lot she knew so well, but everything looked different. Camera trucks lined the street, and crew members carried equipment through the front door of the restaurant, where she had once served coffee and cleaned tables. The neon sign that had flickered for years had been replaced with a bright new one, and fresh paint covered the exterior walls. Maya wore jeans and a simple sweater, trying to blend in with the film crew rather than stand out as the famous musician everyone expected her to be. She had specifically requested a small production team for this music video, wanting to keep the focus on the story rather than the spectacle. "Maya, we're ready for you," called Danny, the director she had chosen specifically because he understood her vision. He was young, passionate about storytelling, and had grown up in a working-class family that reminded Maya of her own background. Inside Pete's, Maya was struck by how much smaller everything seemed. The booths, where she had served hundreds of customers, looked cramped. The kitchen appeared tiny compared to the recording studios she now frequented, and the whole place had an intimacy she had forgotten about during her time playing large concert halls. Dave stood behind the counter, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt and tie that his wife had obviously picked out for the occasion. When he saw Maya, his expression was unreadable, not quite a smile, but not the disapproval she remembered from their last conversation. "So you came back after all?" Dave said, extending his hand. "Guess you proved me wrong about the music thing." Maya shook his hand, feeling the familiar roughness of someone who worked with his hands every day. "You weren't wrong to be worried about me leaving a steady job. I got lucky." "Lucky?" Dave raised an eyebrow. "From what I hear, you've been working pretty hard. Lisa showed me some articles about you. Sounds like you're doing well for yourself." The conversation was interrupted by crew members positioning lights and setting up cameras around the diner. Maya's old piano had been carefully transported from her apartment and placed near the window where table 6 used to be. The instrument looked small and worn compared to the professional pianos she played now, but seeing it in the diner felt like reuniting with an old friend. Lisa appeared from the kitchen, still wearing her server's uniform even though the diner was closed for filming. She had insisted on working the day of the shoot, saying it wouldn't feel right to have actors pretending to be waitresses when real ones were available. "I can't believe you brought your grandmother's piano here," Lisa said, running her hand along the wooden surface. "It looks perfect in this spot, like it belongs here." As the crew finished setting up, Maya sat at the piano bench and ran her fingers over the keys. They felt different from the professional instruments she was used to, some slightly out of tune, others requiring more pressure to produce clear notes. But there was something honest about those imperfections that million-dollar concert pianos couldn't replicate. "Whenever you're ready," Danny said from behind the main camera. "Just pretend we're not here. Play the way you used to when you worked here." Maya closed her eyes and tried to transport herself back to those late nights, when she would come home exhausted and find comfort in music. She thought about Mrs. Chen listening through the walls, about the stress of counting tips and worrying about rent, about the dreams she had almost given up on. The melody that emerged was her grandmother's lullaby, the same song that had become the breakthrough moment in her professional recording career. But playing it here, in the place where her musical journey had nearly ended, gave it new meaning. The song carried the weight of struggle and hope, of ordinary people working hard to build better lives for themselves and their families. As Maya played, the film crew captured not just her performance, but also the faces of the Pete's employees watching from the background. Dave leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, but Maya could see tears forming in his eyes. Lisa sat in a booth, her chin resting on her hands, smiling with pride for her former coworker, who had made it to the other side of impossible dreams. When the song ended, the diner was completely quiet, except for the soft whir of camera equipment. Maya opened her eyes to find everyone staring at her with expressions she recognized from her very first viral video. The look of people who had been moved by something they hadn't expected to feel. "That was perfect," Danny said softly. "I don't think we need another take." After the crew finished packing up their equipment, Maya stayed behind to talk with her former coworkers. The conversation was different now, not because Maya had become famous, but because time had passed and perspectives had changed. Dave told her about his son graduating high school and getting accepted to college. Lisa shared updates about her daughter's wedding plans and her own thoughts about maybe returning to school. "You know," Dave said as they prepared to lock up the diner, "I still think what you did was crazy, leaving a steady job to chase a dream most people never catch. But I'm glad you proved me wrong. This place feels different now, knowing that someone who worked here made it to Carnegie Hall." Maya looked around the diner one last time, taking in the familiar smell of coffee and the sound of the old refrigerator humming in the corner. "This place made me who I am," she said. "I learned more about resilience and hard work here than I did in any music class." Before leaving, Maya made an announcement that surprised everyone, including her own management team. She was establishing a scholarship fund for working musicians, people who had talent and dreams but lacked the financial security to pursue them. The fund would provide monthly stipends for rent and groceries, allowing recipients to focus on their music without worrying about survival jobs. "I know what it's like to choose between following your dreams and paying your bills," Maya explained to the local news reporter who had been invited to cover the music video shoot. "Nobody should have to make that choice alone." The scholarship fund would be administered through the community center where Maya had once taught piano lessons to children. She had quietly been funding music programs there for months, but this was her first public announcement about giving back to her community. Mrs. Chen was among the first to apply for one of the scholarships, not for herself, but for her nephew who showed musical promise but couldn't afford lessons. When Maya called to tell her the application had been approved, Mrs. Chen cried over the phone. "Your music saved me during my darkest time," Mrs. Chen said. "Now you're helping other people find their music too." 6 months later, Maya released the music video filmed at Pete's Diner. The simple, honest performance resonated with millions of viewers who saw their own struggles reflected in her story. But the comments that meant the most to Maya came from people who were inspired to pursue their own creative dreams, whether in music or other fields. The girl who had once served coffee while dreaming of Carnegie Hall had learned that success wasn't just about reaching the biggest stages or selling the most albums. Real success was staying connected to the experiences and people who had shaped her, and using her platform to help others climb the same mountains she had conquered. Maya still played piano at midnight sometimes, alone in her apartment with no cameras or microphones or audiences. Those private sessions reminded her why she had fallen in love with music in the first place, and they kept her grounded in the simple truth that the best art comes from the most honest places in the human heart.